In 1956, on a small village in Nagaland, an unspeakable tragedy unfolded. Innocent villagers caught in a crossfire of politics and war found themselves hunted, displaced, and starving. This is their story. In the dense forest near Settsü village in Mokokchung, a group of soldiers marched early in the morning just before sunrise. A girl walking through the forest, on her way home after fetching water, watches discreetly with fear and uncertainty. For she had heard that the Indian soldiers had burned their neighboring Ao villages like wildfire. The girl rushes into the village, breathless. "The army! They're coming!" the girl shouts, alarming all the villagers. Chaos ensues as villagers hurriedly flee into the jungle, abandoning everything. All the villagers were able to flee from their village and into the dense jungle. The Indian soldiers marched into the village and took no time to put the houses up in flames. The village burned, along with all the granaries, paddy fields, and cattle. Smoke filled the air as soldiers leave, and the villagers, now hidden in the jungle, watch helplessly as everything they own turns to ash. Deep in the jungle, villagers regroup and decide to build a makeshift camp and to flee as far away from the towns, which the army had now occupied, from where the operations into the interior regions were being sent out. Homeless, hungry, and fearful, they built camps deeper into the jungle, as they had to keep moving from one spot to another as the army hunted them. In a makeshift jungle camp 3 months later, they had even built a wooden platform from where the pastor conducted the Sunday services. Sentries would be on duty every hour, sitting on treetops to warn the community in case some army patrols or operations came near. Life was very tough in these jungle camps. Already the elderly and the weaker children died of starvation and various diseases. Typhoid, pneumonia, and dysentery were taking a toll on the starving villagers. With no food left, they were now surviving on wild yams and wild edible leaves. One resourceful villager, Talikapa, made several bows and arrows. He hands a few to other men and often went out in search of food. On several occasions, they were able to shoot some wildlife with their poisoned arrows, which was shared equally among the whole community. But there was never enough for anyone to even have a square meal. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but the jungle offered what it could. They shared every morsel, keeping their hopes alive. At night they would huddle together and try to sleep in the cold. The younger children would sleep near the fires, and their parents covered them with banana leaves for warmth. However, many of them died, and they realized that more would follow if they did not get food soon. So a party was sent by the elders to the Lotha area to beg for seeds of vegetables, rice, etc. When they returned with the seeds of various crops, they decided to cut down the jungles and start chum cultivation. For several days, they were able to clear the jungles without being detected by any army patrols. The elders and the able-bodied among them would go to these strenuous works with loincloths strapped tightly around their waists to somehow relieve their pangs of hunger. When these workers returned to their camps at night, their hungry children would run to them with hopes of food wrapped inside their waistcloths. Often a father, on reaching the camp, would collapse to the ground in exhaustion and say, "Please don't unwrap the loincloth. There's nothing inside. If you unwrap it, your father will die." For nearly a week now, the villagers had been able to work without being detected. But on June 16, 1956, a platoon of Indian Army was approaching. After having an intel that villagers were working in the jungles, those villagers working in the higher ground had seen the army patrol coming, so they fled after giving warning to the 8 men who had been working in a gully. But unfortunately, they did not hear the warning. They continued to work, oblivious of the danger approaching them. The 8 workers found themselves surrounded by a platoon of soldiers with cocked rifles. Fear gripped them, and though some thought of fleeing, they were too surrounded and too weak from starvation to try. Most of them looked like scarecrows rather than humans. They were all ordered to come out of the gully. Then, amidst a rain of rifle butts and boots, the questioning began. "You are undergrounds. Where are your rifles? Where is your camp?" Even when they pleaded that they were just hungry villagers trying to plant some rice for their children, the beating and questioning continued. Then they were all bound together and ordered to walk uphill to the road where the convoy had stopped. They stumbled and fell, rose again and fell again as they tried to help one another up the slope to the road. When they finally reached, most of them were half dead. On the road, they were beaten again by the convoy commander and others, asking the same questions that were asked earlier. Getting no information from them, they were ordered to line up by the side of the road and stand still. By now, most of them were too weak to even stand upright. Orders were given and rifles were loaded. Then all of a sudden, the officer asked 2 of them to be released. They were Kilem Soba and Imna Nikan. They were the 2 youngest members of the group, both of them having just turned 12. In spite of their young age, they were both sturdy youths and were therefore assisting the adults on that fateful day. The officer called them to stand by his side and watch carefully. They stood fearfully watching, aware of what was going to happen next. The officer pointed his gun in the air and fired a single shot. Hundreds of bullets ripped into the bodies of the 6 men. 5 of them fell like ragdolls to the ground. But one of them, Maranchiba, jumped up and fled into the jungle. They had been roped together when they were being executed, but one bullet, after passing through Sekjameri, the village elder's stomach, had cut the rope that had bound Maranchiba and the village elder's hands together. The bullet had not only cut the rope, but had also shattered Maranchiba's wrist. He was, however, able to run, with his wrist still attached to his arm, by some tendons and bones. When he reached camp after 3 hours, he had bullet holes in his shirt and pants, and also 3 spots on his head where bullets had singed his hair. Back on the road, Kilim Suba and Imnanikan were so horrified by the sight of their uncle's bodies, they were speechless from the shock and simply stood there as though in a trance. Then the officer of the convoy came and stood before them, and he said sternly to go back to their jungle hideout and tell all their villagers to come out from hiding. Otherwise, they will also be shot like these people. With that warning, they were released. As they were climbing up a hill towards their hideout, they heard the convoy restart and resume its journey towards Kohima. They cried and wept all the way back to the camp. And when they reached camp, neither of them could speak for a long time. After the surviving three narrated what had happened, the villagers decided to go back to the spot. They found the bullet-riddled bodies piled one on top of another in a roadside drain where they had been thrown. Mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters wept bitterly as they lifted the bodies from the drain and took them to their former village. They dug a common grave for the three victims to be laid down at their village site. As if nature itself shared their sorrow, heavy rain suddenly began to fall, extinguishing the bamboo torches they were using to bury their loved ones. Kilimsuba wakes up again, with his heart beating fast. But this is not his first time having those nightmares. He recalls the months after the dreadful incident. For months after the incident, Kilemsuba and an Imnanikan could barely eat, haunted by the sight of the execution. Many nights, they woke up screaming, unable to escape the memories. Below Settsü village, on a small hillock where the winds gently blows, there stands a monument, bearing the following words: O eyes sublime with tears and laughter for all ages, the names of those souls, Tseg Gemeri, El Imtongkokba, Estem Janwati, Anchaba, and Danba, that were killed on 16 June 1956